Prof. Prof. Duplessis, you've written extensively on architecture, innovation, built environment. You have taught so many students around the world. You have spoken around the world. You have written so many books. You have published in journals. You have spoken at conferences. You have initiated so many projects, Prof. Duplessis. You therefore stand out as a leader in architecture, in academia, in innovation, and you are definitely making the world different. And congratulations to you. And you inspire so many architects around the world. So, Prof, just take us into confidence, into your world. What did it take to become, should I say, to become like you? What did it take? What was the sacrifice? What did you do differently? Because there's so many women in architecture, there's so many women in practice, but you stand out. What did it take to get to where you are, Prof?
Jennifer, I think it's a combination of things. The first is that I am incredibly tenacious. So once I put my mind on something and I've decided to go for something, there's nothing that stops me. And I will find ways, even if it takes me 20 years to do something, I will find a way to get to that point. I think the second part is that none of this happens by yourself. You can be a fantastic person, but all along my life, I've been very fortunate in that I have been placed in positions where I got to meet incredible people who opened doors for me, people who inspired me, people who created opportunities for me. And my entire career, if I look back at that, is sort of a series of fortunate events of meeting people who've really made a difference. It made me think differently about the world, and then have given me the opportunity to grow and to take a place in that world. And then the third thing I think is that you need to have self-belief. If you don't believe in yourself, nobody else is going to believe in you. And so it's really important to develop that quality, to understand what it is that you can offer, what are your strengths, but also what are your weaknesses, and in that weaknesses, where are the people and who are the kind of people that you need to bring with you and to bring into your party to help you to fill in those places where you have weaknesses.
Really, yes. Really amazing, Prof. I like what you say, the belief in yourself, because obviously everyone can cheer you on, but unless you can cheer yourself on, I guess not much can happen. But I also like what you said, the series of fortunate events that came your way or happened in your life. But also what I'm hearing is the ability to make the most of those fortunate events, because many people get fortunate events, but you don't do anything about it. So we also honor you for that. Not just there were many series of fortunate events, you definitely made the most of it. But Prof. Duplessis, how about becoming a leader in architecture? How did you manage to do that? Because not everybody can become a head of department and remain the head of department for years. How does one develop that leadership and remain a notable leader that the whole world acknowledges?
I don't really know how to describe it. I mean, my path is not necessarily a path that I would recommend for others. And as I keep telling my students, is that the people who studied with me and the people who were my lecturers when I studied at the University of Victoria, where I'm now the head of department, they would have voted me as the least likely person to end up as the head of department. I was a very difficult student. I was one of those students who constantly challenged everything. Constantly challenged what the profession was supposed to be about. Challenged my lecturers in what I thought at that point was very limited vision. So it was always standing there and not really thinking about what I was doing, but just challenging and stepping forward. And that ended up costing me quite a few years at varsity. And then I went out and I actually never became a practicing architect. I did work in architectural offices for a while, but I never registered as an architect. So I'm not legally allowed in South Africa to call myself an architect. that is another thing, is how does somebody who's not legally allowed to be an architect become the head of a department of architecture?
Exactly.
But my path eventually took me to research. And that was also, as I said, it's all of these kind of unfortunate events. I was working in development facilitation, and there was a series of crises in my personal life that had to do with my parents, and the whole business collapsed, and I found myself that I had the end of the month, and this is the middle of the month, and there's no money in my bank account to pay the end of the month.
Yeah.
So the creative solution to this was to go and register for a master's degree so that I could get a student loan so I could pay my bills at the end of the month.
Oh, wow.
So that's how I became involved in the field of academia really. I then ended up working at the CHRISNA for 13 years, again coming in on a 6-month contract. Then I got while I was visiting, I did my master's degree on sustainable development in the built environment, which at that stage, I'm not going to tell you how many years ago, but we're talking decades.
Yeah, but you finished.
But I finished it, but that decades ago, this was a very new topic. Nobody knew what this was about. So I said, well, let me go and figure out what do they mean with this thing called sustainable development, and what does it mean for us in the built environment. So I started working at the CSR contract for 6 months on crime prevention through environmental design. And while I was there, the director, and as I said, you have these, I hesitate to call them fairies or fairy godfathers, but they come into your life. And Dr. Rodney Milford called me in and said, there's this meeting in Paris where they have this discussion around sustainability in the built environment. Would I like to attend? And I said, of course, yes. He said, well, off you go, but you're not you are an observer. Remember, you don't even have a master's degree. You are an observer. You're not allowed to say a word. So I walked into this meeting in Paris, and there are all these very important professors sitting there, and I'm the only woman in the room. And of course, it lasted about an hour, and then I really had to say something. And again, they're stepping up, believing in what you have to say, that you have to make a contribution. That really kickstarted my entire research career. And so that went up, that I then went back to the CSIO. I started looking particularly about sustainable human settlement. So the fact that we now have the Department of Sustainable Human Settlement is because I kept on nagging and saying, you can't just call it Department of Housing.
Wow.
This is not what
Was
this
it
is
you?
about. We need to look about it. So I kept on whispering in people's ears, and I kept on pushing this term until eventually, lo and behold, we have a Department of Sustainable Human Settlement. So,
amazing.
So that took me into exploring a whole set of things, as you said, around the issues that we have in our country, and how all of these things, in terms of inequality, in terms of about spatial design, but also the broader environmental pictures and our climate change, come together to create particular living conditions, and that there should be ways for us to improve those living conditions. Eventually, the CSR and I went our separate ways for a number of reasons, and I walked away. You get to a point where you become really tired. And particularly also in South Africa, I got so tired of working with government, and I can see where things should be going. And I see everywhere we have fantastic policies, but none of it, we're not delivering on the policies. When we do deliver, when we have a choice between one way or another, we would inevitably choose the wrong path to follow. And I could see how things just getting worse and worse and worse. And I personally did not cope with it anymore. You know, you feel that people get that emotional burnout where you've been pushing the boulder up the hill for such a long time, and you see it going to roll over you eventually because you're not going to get it over the top because there's all these people pushing back on the other side. So I thought, well, let me take a break and then see where I go from there. And I ended up working then at the University of Victoria's Department of Construction Economics. Thinking, well, these are the people who are the future developers.
Yeah, at least.
So maybe I can plant some little seeds in there, and I managed to convince them to create a module on sustainable construction.
Amazing.
In that department. So particularly so that at least I know that the people who are holding the purse strings in the private sector will go out there and they will have a better understanding of why these issues are important and why we should look at it. How much of that is actually now still filtered through, I have no idea, but that's all you can do is you can plant a seed.
Yeah, you planted a seed.
And one or two of those will grow into magnificent trees. That's all you can
Amazing.
do. So then while I was there, the head of the Department of Architecture, Professor Karel Bakker, unfortunately passed. And the dean asked me to apply for the position because he felt that architecture does not really do research. You know, they do a bit of historical research, but he couldn't see any research coming out of the department. So my job was to go in there and change architects into researchers.
Amazing.
So I've now been there for 6 years, and I think I am starting to see some success there. Some really, really interesting work starting to come in, mind shift in terms of how we approach it, what the role of architects can be, and that architects can be so much more than just simple designers of facades. And, you know, we're not the pretty. I saw the other day there was a part of this, various Facebook groups, and in one of these, there was a question that somebody asked, what is the budget that is allocated in a project to prettify the architecture?
Like makeup, like how much is allocated?
So what is, what is the wardrobe budget? You know?
Exactly.
And
imagine.
Thought that somebody can ask that question, and then there's this whole flurry of answers, and how many people would actually start saying, oh, they set aside this much for the aesthetics. And I'm thinking, this is not architecture. This is not good architecture. It might produce buildings, but that's not what architecture should be about. You know, the beauty comes out of how you put all these various considerations together, but it's not, architects are not cake decorators, but in somewhere we actually place ourselves into that. But I can't remember who said this. It's a very famous philosopher who sort of said that there's 3 art, cake decorating is one of them, and architecture is a minor branch of cake decorating.
Imagine.
And that's what the profession of architecture has come to symbolize. The people you come in to make things look pretty. And I think that's doing the profession a disservice. And in many ways, as I said now, where we have to have self-belief, it's also that self-belief of the profession that we actually can make a change. I mean, we're the people who envision. We envision futures. We envision what things can look like. We've got all the creativity of dreaming up better things, better ways of doing things. Why should we limit ourselves to becoming either glorified project managers or glorified cake decorators?
Imagine. I know we all like cake, but it doesn't sound quite nice. Like, I think specialists. And Prof, I just love this because this is also what partly this is about. It's about to advocate for architecture, to say we are more than sitting behind a computer and drawing these lines and printing it out, giving it to the city and building something. No, we are more than that. Architecture can actually change the world. And if every architect dies a bit, like you are, like you said, no, sustainability. There's something called sustainability in human settlements. There's something called sustainability in the world. There's something called sustainability in construction. And now there's something called architecture research, and we can innovate and come up with new ways of doing things in architecture that is way beyond just drawing the line and getting a check, you know? And of course, we refuse all those names like icing decorators and cake decorators and pretty, no, we refuse. We will not allow architecture to go that route. And thank you, Prof, for bringing it to the attention of the world, because it's important that we now know the difference that you have made on top of everything we say about you in the news, in the media. But this bit, I personally didn't know about it. The difference that you have made in initiating the role of the architect, the perception of the architect, the contribution of the architect beyond just, coloring, adding a line, printing it, giving to the client, getting a paycheck. And we are honored that we had you to rebel against certain things in society, because unless anyone rebels against anything, then everything is deja vu, same old, same old. We need some people to say, I don't accept this, I don't stand for this, whether it's a student, whether it's an academic, whether it's someone in practice. We need more people like you, Prof. Du Plessis, to say we don't take this. That's the only way we can change the world. And as I believe, architecture can change the world. Prof, another aspect we'd like you to advise the world. We have seen all the work you've done and all the things you've written and some of the initiatives you've indicated. Prof, what if resources were not in your limitation? What else do you want to see different in the world? What else do you want to see architects do differently in the world?
I want to see architects taking our politics. To step in there and lead. If you look at some of the most intriguing and interesting changes that have happened in terms of city management, it is where architects have become the executive mayors, where architects have had a lot of power. But in that, you need an architect to actually understand what that power of vision is. And I think a lot of what we are teaching architects, I'm definitely trying to not have this happen in my school or in my department, but I think there is still a big way in terms of how we educate architects, is that they're sort of jumping in the middle and they start, as you say, building this fantastic maquettes, and they're all going to be
Exactly.
What architects, the skills that architects need to learn is that pre-thinking skills, the pre-design skills of how you sit with a client, how you sit with the community within which you are going to work, and start co-designing with them to come up with something that is not about solving problems, but it's about saying, what is the potential we have in this place?
Wow.
We may all sit here and we get so caught up in the problems that we don't actually see all this potential. What is the dreams that we have for this place? And then how do we bring those to the fore? And in that process, we will solve problems. But it's the kid. Architects understand that that's part of their role, is to get that dreaming and that envisioning process going. And that it's not their job to come up necessarily with the dream, but their job is to elicit the dream from the people, from what the site tells them, from what the context tells them, from what the culture is. And every building sits within a particular place. And I don't know about you, but I know when I was a student, a lot of the time you have these buildings floating in this lovely landscapes, this idyllic landscape. But actually they're sitting in the middle of a city, and whatever they do, they create change. They can make it better or they can make it worse. One of my favorite examples of how architecture makes things worse is Stanford. We have probably the highest concentration of Green Star rated buildings in the country. And it's all this fabulous glass buildings, but it is a hell of a place to work in. To walk from one building to another. How it adds to the urban heat island effect, how hostile it makes the streets. There's no safety, there's no cover. You literally feel like you are so exposed when you walk inside, or when you walk around inside them. And that is because each of these buildings only thought about the ego of the architect and the ego of the client. And they did not think about how can we contribute to make this actually a functioning community, a place where people can linger in the streets, and they can sit and they can meet each other, and they can rest if there's, there's a shady place for them to rest. There's trees to make things cool. Instead, we have all these glass buildings that just keep reflecting all the heat back into the streets. And nobody, it's too hot to walk in the streets. So it's become a totally inhospitable environment. But can you imagine if people thought about, if we've got all this money, we want to pump into this area. Yes, we're going to put in offices of fancy corporates. We're going to have fancy penthouses. But what about the people who come there to work there? What about the people who cannot afford to live there, but they have to work there? How do we accommodate them? How do we create spaces for them to wait for public transport? How do we create spaces for them that would allow them maybe to come and live in that area where they can work? And so those are the kind of questions that I really think that architects need to ask their clients, is to sit down and say, not just, okay, so what is it that, how do you want this to, what is your image? And is your image really to be this shiny beacon of hate? Or is your image that we are here to make a difference to the country, that we want to contribute to the betterment of society, do whatever we want to do? And play a little bit with that and come up with ways of how we can eventually, if we have one building doing it, it opens it up for the next building to also start thinking about what can I do? And eventually they can, all the Chinas come together and they create a space that helps us to solve so many of the problems that we have.
Amazing. Prof. Tuks, and how about there's the other space that we as architects haven't really gone into. Look at, for instance, you go in some of our communities and you look at the litter, the rubbish, and then the combination of the potholes, the litter, the crime. In some of our communities, give us some advice. How can we as architects enter that space? Because there's no clients there. There's no one is saying, Prof. Tuks, here's a contract for you. But we can't accept society to continue like this. And yet, every year, let's say in your own university, probably, top of my head, maybe at least 25 architects are coming out, And if we combine the University of Pretoria with VETS, with University of Cape Town, we're probably at 100 architects per year coming out. But our society, how can we enter that other market? Give us some advice. What do you think? Because it looks like there's an anomaly.
The person you should actually be interviewing for this is my colleague, Dr. Karen Kompra. And the reason I'm saying this is Karen has started at the university, the unit for urban citizenship.
Amazing.
What we're doing there is we are working with our students in community in Pretoria. In Pretoria, we're working in communities such as Cluster View and Cemetery View and Melusi and areas of Mamelodi, so where there are informal settlements. And the idea is to get the students to first of all come and understand that when you go into such a community, you need to do this with great humility. You are entering into their space, and they have ideas around what they need,
what they want
for them. And as I say, to work with them to understand what their needs are, and also to help them to see what the potential are, so that they can get some hope, they can get some vision, and they can take ownership of what happened. And a lot of the work that we do, and I know that we have this problem every year in our masters and in PROF year, where the students who are working in this particular field of urban citizenship come with design projects, then their master's projects that are incredibly sensitive, that are really looking at how we can contribute to the betterment of that place, and they've done this through a co-design process with the community. And then you examiners step in and they say, oh, but this is not architecture because it's too simple. It's simple buildings. It's not this fancy thing that we can put on there. And it's not 5 stories high or 10 stories high. It's not an airport. It doesn't meet those requirements of what we see as architectural complexity. But what I don't understand is that the complexity does not sit in the building, in the object. The complexity sits in the process that was followed to get to that object. So, and I think that's one of the big things that we as architects need to start understanding is we need to step away from this idea of that architects are there to produce objects, the building. And actually to understand that an architect can have a much broader role of facilitating this kind of design process that might end up in something that is not necessarily the object, or it might be a series of very small interventions. But those interventions are meaningful and they make a difference. And yes, maybe nobody pays you for them and you do this over the weekends.
Exactly.
But it's part of also of giving back to society. And I think that's another thing. All of us, if you've had a university education in this country, you are beyond privileged. Doesn't matter where you came from, doesn't matter what your salary is. If you've had a university education, you are absolutely beyond privilege. And part of that comes with that privilege is a responsibility to give back, to help, to use your privilege to make something better in life. And I think we need to start accepting that responsibility and not just think about ourselves and about how are we going to use this money now to go for another wonderful European holiday, but maybe see how one can get involved in helping communities at that level, doing work with pro bono. So one of the other things we're trying to get going is what we call the community action labs. And the idea there is that we have so many students who graduate, and they've got to do their internship either after their third year or after their master's year. And they've now been trained, we've got them all excited about doing this community work, but how can they get involved? How can they work, and then they go and they work for some of the big companies and they get totally disillusioned because it's all just about marketing. What we're trying to set up is a system where we can find sponsors, corporate sponsors who would sponsor things like classrooms or clinics or community centers or community gardens or things like that. And that our students then work with the communities to help design them, and they are then supervised by practicing architects so that they can tick their boxes, so that they can get their professional exams and professional registration, but that they can work in these environments and continue working there. So I think that's another way to become involved, is to say, well, I would be prepared to mentor such a person. I might be prepared to contribute to a salary. It might not be the full salary, but I will contribute to a salary for students who are working in this particular field. So I think there are many ways that we can do this. We just need to get those systems up and running and see where everybody can contribute in the best way that they feel that they can.
Prof. Tuks, I feel very honored to have had this discussion with you. Especially, I mean, a lot of what you're saying, I didn't even know that the urban citizenship. I think this is part of the campaign, and I'm glad many of us are actually campaigning for similar things. Because as an architect, you've said it very beautifully, Prof. We are privileged. Let me even talk about myself. We are privileged to have had an education. If you think about the 6 years and then the master's for another few years and then the doctorate for another few years, these are privileges. So regardless of, I think we would even be the last people to say, pay me. You know, I need to do this social responsibility. So how much are you going to pay me? How much am I going to get out of this? No, because the state, like you said, Prof, very beautifully at the beginning, many people actually invested in us to actually come this far. Even if anyone just has a bachelor's, there's a lot of community taxes that go into that degree. So to an extent, we should even be the last people to say, I need to be paid. Yes, I'm going into that community, but how much are you going to pay me? I think, like you said, I should also be doing my bits to say, no, we're going to make so much noise about this. We need more architects giving back to the community for free, because in many cases, you have your own practice already. You have your own many things that you have at your disposal, but the anomaly between the life of an architect or the benefits of an architect with a community that's literally falling apart in some areas, it's literally unacceptable. So I guess I joined the campaign with your team where we make so much noise about this. More architecture, more urban citizenship in architecture until we see a better South Africa. We're gonna go out there. This is my bit, Prof. Du Plessis, to get onto social media and make some noise and link up with you and everyone else to say, thank you so much, all architects, and all the glory that we receive, but this is not enough. We need to do more. And yes, let me say it out there, we need more architects to give to the cause. I guess the same way some religions give to a cause and give to a cause, maybe we need more architects to say, 10% of our income is going into community development as architects. And for our young architects to know that just because you're not designing that glass building in Santo doesn't make you less of an architect. No, maybe this is actually the architect for South Africa. Maybe this is our role. The role of the architect in South Africa is very different from the role of the architect in, I don't know, in Paris and wherever. For us, we have our own definition of what an architect can do. So, Prof. Du Plessis, I'm really honored that you've brought out and shared with us many parts, your personal story, but also what your department is doing very, very differently. I'm sure not many people in the world even know this, especially the urban citizenship, the work you're doing in the communities, the new school of thought and mentality you're putting into the students of being different architects. And of course, the willingness to give back to community, to those who haven't had the privilege that I have had, you have had, many students have had, many architects have had. I think it's time for us now to join forces and say, enough is enough. We're making a difference in South Africa. We're living South Africa better. In our way, as architects, we will do our bit. Prof, from my side, that's it from me. I'm happy. Any parting shots, Prof? How can we make your dreams come true? We're gonna make more noise about everything you're doing, Prof. Put it on media, put it on LinkedIn, Facebook, everywhere. We want everybody to know and join the cause. If for nothing else, architects in corporate, come on. Let's put more money into urban citizenship at the University of Pretoria. If for nothing else, you know? What else should we do for you, Prof. Du Plessis?
I think it's what you've now been saying, supporting us, helping us, and as I say, it doesn't need to be money, it can be time, it can be opening up doors, creating connections, introducing us to possible sponsors, bringing projects for our community action lab. There are so many different ways that one can contribute, and I have to say that I did not start this out as a marketing exercise for the department.
No.
The urban citizenship unit, but I do think that there is lots of people who are not the only university that is doing something similar. So if you're not in Gauteng, if you're sitting somewhere else, your own universities or universities in your country, in your province may also have similar programs. So link in with them, talk to them, and let's do this as a country and as a continent and show the world the real difference that architects can make in how we are dealing and how we are going to address the challenges of this 21st century, because we are really going to need to pull together and be very creative and at the same way be very humble in how we approach this, because we don't have all the answers.
Thank you so much, Prof. CHRISNA Du Plessis. This has been an honor, a privilege, and I'll take responsibility for the marketing because that's my bit. That's my bit that I can give you. That's how I can show how much love I have for the work you're doing, is to do the marketing. That's my bit. Yes, and I'm really honored and thank you so much, and we salute your staff because you said the different teams that are involved in this and your members of staff. And we also acknowledge them for having a slightly different mindset, because it was in their power to produce more architects looking to work in Santon and everywhere else. But the fact that they chose a different route, that's also very commendable. This is the end of our short talk show. Prof. Du Plessis, really an honor, and expect my call again and again and again.
Thank you, Jennifer, and all the best with this wonderful venture of yours as well.
Thank you, and have a great weekend. Get slogan first.
There we go. Let me leave.
Thank you.